Today I'm here at Antietam National Battlefield to talk about why Antietam was not just a battle in the Civil War, but a turning point in American history. Antietam is known as the bloodiest day in American history, but today we're going to dig into the root on why it was a turning point in American history. Antietam has three main points as to why it was important. First, this was the first battle fought on Northern Territory. Second, this was the win Lincoln needed to produce the Emancipation Proclamation. And third, Lee also needed a win to get foreign support for money and artillery. I'm at one of the main landmarks of the Battle of Antietam. This is known as the Dunker Church. For the Confederates, this is where Stonewall Jackson commanded from to command his army. And for the Unions, this is a focal point where they could hit a big white structure. On September 17, 1862, at 5:30 in the morning, the Battle of Antietam commenced with the first shot fired in this very cornfield. The Confederates were lined up here and the Unions were marching through the cornfield. 27,000 people marching towards each other. When the Unions broke through at that fence line, the Confederates stood up and annihilated the Unions. The casualty rate was 8,200 people. This equaled out to 30 men a minute. A casualty equals wounded, dead, or missing.
So I'm going to give you a perspective of John Bell Hood, who is the regiment commander of the Texas Brigade, who was the second wave going into the cornfield behind us here. And he literally, as he went into the cornfield, pushed the Union back for a second and third time into the cornfield. But of course, in doing that, you were talking about casualties. He lost over 82% of his regiment in the cornfield that day. So think about a regiment, probably 1,000 men. 8 out of 10 of them didn't make it out of this cornfield. So in the cornfield, on the Union side, the right side of the Union flank, a gentleman named Abner Doubleday anchored the right side of the Union line. And Abner Doubleday, if you know the name Doubleday, was actually the founder of modern day baseball.
At 9:30 a.m., the second phase of Antietam started here at the Sunken Lane. 3,000 Confederates were laying in this lane right here, awaiting 10,000 Union soldiers to come over this field. It started out great when the Confederates were able to annihilate the Union soldiers from their vantage point, but soon the Unions found a break in the Confederate line and were able to fire all the way down this lane, leaving 2,500 casualties on the Confederate side. This didn't even compare to the 2,900 casualties out of the 10,000 men on the Union side.
So here at Sunken Lane and Bloody Lane, John B. Gordon, who led the regiment from Georgia, just right up the road here, literally was wounded 5 times. He was shot 5 times, the last one in the head. And the only thing that saved him, as he says, is, and he survived this war, believe it or not, and survived this battle. The only thing that made him, he says, survive is he had a shot that went through his hat. So the blood ran out of the hat and he didn't drown in his own blood.
By the end of this phase, the Sunken Lane was known as Bloody Lane because of how much blood was flowing down this lane from all of the casualties. We're going to take it from another perspective from the Union side. Phase 3 was happening simultaneously with Phase 2, the Sunken Lane. This was happening at 9:30 in the morning at Burnside Bridge. 5,200 Union troops were trying to make it across this bridge, while 500 Confederate soldiers were firing down at them from that bank. Connecticut couldn't make it, Maryland couldn't make it, New York couldn't make it. But when Pennsylvania asked if they could get their whiskey rations back, they made it across.
If you understand the battle, they got to have some reason to want to go do something. And the fact that they had their rations taken away from them. And hey, they asked, if I cross the bridge, can I get my whiskey rations back? They had something to fight for. And if you look at this bridge, it's not very wide. So if you look at the 5,200 you were talking about versus the 500 on the hill, 5,200 trying to cross this bridge is significant. And 4 wide probably is max on this bridge. So now you're crossing the bridge, not only with 4 wide people, you got casualties laying on the bridge.
There may not be any more people living from the Civil War, but there definitely are living things. This tree behind me is called the Witness Tree. It's a sycamore tree that was still around in the Civil War and witnessed the Battle of Antietam. How did the terrain affect this battle?
Okay, so terrain in any of the Civil War battles was a key point. You always want to have, as we would call, the high ground. If you're fighting king of the hill, you always want to be the king of the hill, right? So in the Battle of Antietam, as we went through all three phases, if you've noticed in all three phases, the Confederate Army had the high ground in all three phases. You can see it even more here as we're looking down at Burnside Bridge. But you want to have terrain because you can't battle what you can't see. And again, as we walk through Antietam, you noticed, what do you see? Rolling hills, pieces of point, and every piece of this battle, the advantage to the Confederate side was they had the high ground on every piece.
What tactics were used during the Battle of Antietam?
When you talk about tactics here at Antietam, I think you got to think more mindset. So you go a couple days before this battle actually took place. McClellan actually got what's called Special Order 191, which is really Lee's playbook, but never used it. So it was always a passive approach, a passive mindset. If you look at maybe being more aggressive, which what Lee and the Confederate Army was, they probably would have fought this battle on the 16th, because at that point, half the Union or the Confederate Army wasn't even here. Jackson wasn't here yet. A.P. Hill was still at Harper's Ferry. They weren't. If McClellan would have just used the playbook and understand what was going on here, this would probably be a different turnout of this battle. But because he was passive, and hey, I got everything I need right here in the playbook, and I'm just going to wait it out. That was about every battle in the Civil War. The Union just waited out. They always felt they were outnumbered, even though they had the numbers, because of the way the Confederate Army fought. They fought with aggression. You talk about Stonewall Jackson. He was feared. You didn't want to fight against Stonewall Jackson, but he was probably in every battle he fought in outnumbered by at least half as many troops as he was against. So I think that's when you look at tactics and strategy. The Confederate side was more aggressive. The Union generals were more passive. And again, here would probably been a different outcome if they'd had a little bit more aggressiveness to them.
Who won the Battle of Antietam?
So if you look at it from both sides, they're both going to claim victory here. In my mind, it's a draw. Nobody really won the Battle of Antietam. However, it was enough of a victory for Lincoln to issue his Emancipation Proclamation. It was enough of a victory from Lee's side to be able to say, hey, we just need to go back and regroup, and we're going to go again into the North. But if you look at the three phases that we just walked through, nobody clearly won either of the phases.
Why was the casualty rate so high?
Okay, so casualty rate was so high in any Civil War battle, especially here at Antietam, is because of the artillery and the stuff that they were using. So what I have here is two bullets. The one on the right is an actual modern shotgun bullet. The one on the left is a 58 caliber 3-ring that was used during the Civil War. You see the significance of their size. So if this goes into your leg, probably not much going to happen. You're going to have a wound. But if this goes into your leg, depending on what it hits, you're probably losing a leg, and chances are, probably not making it through the battle. So that's the biggest significance, is why the casualty rate was so high, because of the style of ammunition and everything that was used during the Civil War. A direct hit here means you're probably dead.
All of the generals in this battle had the same education, and they all attended the same school. What were the different tactics, or why did they use different tactics?
So personally, I believe they all were West Point graduates, every one of them that is a general in the Civil War. I think the difference is, goes back to the question that you asked: what am I fighting for? And for the Confederate side, they were fighting for a way of life. And for the Union side, they really weren't fighting for much of anything at all, unless we're talking about whiskey rations.
To answer the question, why is Antietam a turning point in American history? First, this was the first battle fought on Northern Territory, which also set up for the Battle of Gettysburg. Second, Lincoln issued the Emancipation Proclamation 5 days after the end of the Battle of Antietam. Third, Lee used the time after the Battle of Antietam to regroup with his troops and then plan to head back up to the north. In this day and age, we fight for no reason. So I'll leave you with this thought: what would you be willing to fight for?